Welcome to the SENcast. My name is Dale Pickles, Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the SENcast. If this is your first SENcast, then welcome. Welcome to the SENcast. Hope you like it. Every week on the SENcast, I have a different guest come on and talk about a topic they are passionate about. And this week we discussed how can schools support parents of SEN children more effectively. My guest in this episode was Sarah Billingham, and Sarah is a specialist teacher who supports children's communication needs. The SENcast is created and produced by us here at B Square, and as well as this podcast, we also have our SENcast sessions. This is our online CPD. And if you haven't accessed the SENcast session before, it is a video CPD session, often with some of the same guests we've had on the podcast, but it's more formal, it's a presentation, and it's a great way to get CPD to all of your staff around SEND. We run 9 live sessions every year and 2 free SEND briefings. And we have 9 other sessions we record as well. And the sessions are £10 per school. And you can watch live on the day if it's a live session, but you can also watch them later on. They are yours forever. We have over 150 sessions you can purchase and use for CPD, but you can also now subscribe and access all sessions for an annual fee. So that's enough about SENcast sessions. Let's get on with the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing how can schools support parents of SEND children more effectively. Joining me this week, my guest is Sarah Billingham. Sarah has been working with children with speech and language needs for over 18 years in mainstream and specialist settings. She is a specialist teacher who supports children's communication needs and supports parents to navigate the various SEN systems. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
So excited to be here and just really exciting to be in the new studio with all of the cameras.
Last time we recorded, we did remotely.
Yeah.
And then I realised you were about 3 miles away. So we're in the office today, which is great. Some schools feel they are often fighting parents of children with SEND. I often feel, and generalising everything into one simple solution, obviously, I often feel this is a mismatch in expectations from both sides.
I think that's really true. And I think what's also true is that we're in a situation where everybody's frustrated.
Yes.
So, we are seeing increasing numbers of children with SEND in our mainstream schools. We are seeing overstretched teachers, SENCOs, etc. But we are also seeing very stressed parents. And so what you have are 2 groups of people who are feeling really stretched, who are perhaps a little bit fragile because of those stresses that I've talked about. So you've got 2 frustrated people in an interaction where they don't necessarily see the point of view of the other person. They don't see the stresses perhaps that other person is under. And so you've got 2 people coming into communications who are already het up. And as you say, there's that mismatch in expectations. The parents are maybe thinking the school should be doing X, Y, and Z. The school are thinking that might not be our job, or maybe parents need to be stepping up and doing whatever it is. And what you can land up is quite an adversarial situation.
I think that bit there is parents thinking schools should do X, Y, and Z. What I found in my governor role, that my school was doing X, Y, and Z, but for some reason didn't let anyone know. So the parents are going, you need to do this. And they're sort of going, well, we already are, so you're just being... But the parent didn't know. So sometimes there's that real kind of what the information point that parent starts from and the information point the school starts from are very, very different. And I do think that it's that just by literally kind of being much clearer on what's going on at the real beginning, so the parent knows as much as possible without, not full on, but these are the stuff we're doing. And then when the parent says you're not doing enough of this, it's like, okay, is it you're not doing enough, or is it you're just not communicating that you're doing it? And I think people are going, well, we've got to do even more. It's like, no, does the parent know how much you're already doing? And I've seen that a lot of the time. It's what you're doing could be enough, but it hasn't been communicated.
Yeah, I think the concept of ordinarily available provision is one of those things where there are lots of practices in schools where there are things that are happening that are kind of part of the fabric of what's happening during the day. But because they've become so embedded in the fabric of what's happening every day, the parents don't know that those accommodations are already in place.
How many parents know of the phrase ordinary available provision?
Only the parents who have had an EHCP come to them in draft where it says, no, you don't need any funding for all of these things because we expect that to be ordinarily available provision.
And they go onto Google, what?
And of course, sometimes there's a gap between what a local authority expects should be ordinarily available and the reality of what's ordinarily available. So, there's lots of mismatches, as you said at the beginning, between expectation and reality.
Yeah. And I think it is, the starting point is, I think if any stressful point in our life, if we all think of a stressful point in our lives, I think everyone, both sexes, will go to not weddings, but house moves. Blokes just turn up to weddings mostly. And I'm being sexist, but it is generally true. But with house moves, everyone gets stressed. And generally, the reason we are all stressed is it's waiting and lack of communication. And that's the only thing I think everyone can relate to that. Everyone can go, what's going on? We're supposed to be exchanging. You're waiting and you're chasing and you're not getting the information. And actually just a couple of extra bits of little communication, just not heard anything yet from the solicitor.
Yeah.
Would just completely transform your mood.
Yeah.
Just being told we haven't made any progress is better than not knowing if we have or haven't made any progress. And it's that sort of thing where that's the only thing where I can sit there and going, actually, we can all experience that. We're trusting someone to look after something for us, and we want them to commit to how well it's going.
Yeah.
And to me, that's kind of what a parent is doing with the school. You have my very precious child, who I know has needs. We've gone through that. We've learnt lots, and I've learnt lots of things about my child. They need supporting. I'm giving them to you. I want that communication. I want to know those needs are being met. And it doesn't have to be lots in my head. It really doesn't. But just something so they know you've got it. I've got this.
Yeah. And that communication, if you like, works as a triangle, because it's not only the communication between the parent and the school or vice versa, but it's also with the student.
Yep.
How much does the child understand about the supports that are in place for them, what's coming up, changes that are happening, those sorts of things. And obviously, depending on the age and developmental stage of the child, depends on how much information you can give them and what stage it's appropriate to give that information. But I think one of the things that adds fuel to some of the adversarial fire is if a child's coming home and reporting something and the parent feels they have no knowledge of those things that are happening. And so it's important that you're kind of looking at that whole triangle of communication and thinking about, are we making sure everybody's in the loop at the right level?
And it's also when your child comes home and tells you what happened, that's their interpretation.
100%.
And don't always get that gun cocked and ready to go and pick a fight. It's clarification first. It might have been they missed some loads of other information going on. Actually, they might have missed out the bit they did because they see they didn't do anything wrong. You've got one version of the story, and it's easy to jump in to protect your child.
Yep.
But actually, their version of events could be a long way from what happened.
Yep.
Could be what happened. Could be somewhere in the middle. Could be, and I think when you're neurodivergent, fairness and justice, actually, they didn't see something else that had happened, or actually something else had happened which caused that, and they're trying to be. There's so many variations on. So if your child does come home and report something, don't just get that keyboard out and start hitting.
I think grace is actually a hugely important part of that. If you think about, if I think about my interactions with my own children, if they were to go into school and describe some of those interactions, I would want the staff to give me some grace in terms of going, like, let's take this with a pinch of salt and actually find out from Mrs. Billingham what that was about. But equally, as parents, we have to give members of school staff that same level of grace and go, okay, not I don't believe my child, but let's take that information, let's ask questions, and let's get some context. Let's get some context about what did happen in this situation. Let's get some other points of view on that. Then absolutely, I'm going to, arm up to the back teeth to fight for my child if I need to. But as you say, that clarification bit's super important.
And when you are asking that clarification, you've got to ask it in a really, really calm way. Not, my son told me you hit him. Why did you hit him? What's the reasons you hit him? Like, you've decided he was hit. Not that actually he walked past as you were carrying something and headbutted your elbow or anything. You've already decided to, in that information, you've got to, if you want to resolve it, you've got to go, my son said something happened at school today. Can you let me know what happened? Something to do with this. If you keep it really vague, you're not going to get their prickles up or the heckles up, whatever. You're not going to really, you're just going to, they go, because it might come back with a meal, nothing really happened. And you're like, okay, that's not how it was for my son. And you work out what the difference is. So when you do send that first email, it's got to be as plain and as calm that we haven't picked a fight yet. I'm still working out if we're going to shout at you or the child or whatever it is, but I don't know yet. Whereas I think that first email, even if they're asking what happened, it can be attacking straight away. And you've just got to, as you said, that grace that, okay, I don't know what happened. I've got a version. I just need to ask more questions before I wind up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think coming back to your points about communication in general, I think that in a lot of our approaches to supporting SEND parents in school, we tend to be reactive rather than proactive. And in a lot of the sort of tips and things I'm going to suggest today in our conversation, it's about thinking about what is our plan for this. Let's be proactive about how do we want to communicate with the parents? What's that going to look like? Do we have some standard operating procedures in terms of using business terms for the information we're going to send out for an annual review, the information we're going to send out when we're putting a child on the SEND register? Have we got some templates for that? It sounds really obvious, but actually I think there are lots of SENCOs that are communicating on the fly because they're busy. And actually you run the risk of reinventing the wheel every time, and that increases the workload.
And you also risk of missing a key bit of information out because actually you've got to put it in there. And so those sorts of bits, if you can kind of think about it once and then reuse it, it makes life so much easier.
And also if you can get ahead of the game and be opening that communication, setting the scene of these are the things that are coming up, this is what it's going to look like, these are your points of contact, then you are meeting the parent before they've had the opportunity to get worked up about, I don't know what's happening here, or what's the story there, or I don't think my child's needs are being met. You're starting your term or your academic year or your relationship with that parent on the front foot rather than on the back foot.
But I know that we live going, I do not have the time to do all of this. And proactive, always, 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 and a few more, is easier, takes less work than the reactive.
Absolutely.
If your partner has had a really bad day and you take a really random guess at what they want for dinner and you get that wrong, you've made their day worse. You then got to deal with, actually, I put a lot of effort in and I've got it wrong, and you're negative because you felt you did a good thing, but they just wanted that and it wasn't there. And it's like, if you just said, what do you want for dinner? I'll cook something nice. They went Nando's. Yeah, that one little bit of communication before you took an action can really, I know I've just been a really, really different example, but it's that extra bit of communication before action is taken, before you walk in and then you find out something, that extra bit of communication makes all the difference.
Oh, totally. And I think there's a couple of things that we need to remember. The first is that all of us as parents are bringing baggage into these conversations. There's no way that we're not. By the time we are having a conversation about our child's special educational needs, there's a whole lot of stuff we're bringing to that conversation. We're bringing all of our fears. We're probably operating in fears about what does this mean? What's my child's future? All of those sorts of things. I've been asked by parents when I've done assessments on children as young as 3 or 4, do I think they might go to university? People are already worrying 16 steps ahead of where they are. So, parents are operating in fear. Parents are stressed by trying to meet their child's needs at home. They are maybe navigating systems that, let's be honest, are illogical and don't connect together very well. So, their child's needs are not being met and they're having to push in order to get their child seen. So they're already in a kind of pushing modality of I've got to push in order to be heard. But also the parents will have needs of their own, whether those are emotional, whether they may have neurodiversity themselves, whether what's happening with their child is causing stress on their relationship with their partner, relationships with siblings in the household, whatever it is. We're bringing all of that baggage into these conversations.
And their baggage of their experience of school.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They've already decided you're not going to help because I wasn't helped. And it is. And it's there's not much, there's nothing, well, no, there is nothing you can do to get rid of that baggage.
Yeah.
They're always going to come with it at first.
Yeah.
Over time, you can reduce it, but it's always going to come with all that baggage at the beginning.
Yeah. And I think, with my professional hats on, we have to recognize that baggage and shift our mindset a little bit from, I've heard quite a few school staff refer to parents as being demanding, which is kind of a little bit pejorative. And it's thinking about, where does that come from? Maybe their communication style is coming over as demanding, but where does that come from? Why is this the case? How do we build a relationship so that this person trusts me and feels that we're working together as a team? So I think that's one of the elements we have to think about. But the other element we have to think about, particularly if we're considering parents' own needs, is making sure that communication is given in advance and that it is also written down. Because we need to allow people time to process the information and put it forward in a way that's really clear and unambiguous, which is usually we are more clear in written form than we are in spoken form, or at least I am. I'm pretty rambly.
I have come across a school, and I don't know who it was, but it was somebody who told me that their school has basically banned parents from emailing the school. You have to go in and say the information. And I'm just like, that's kind of, it's wrong from my point of view. It's like you're basically saying, unless you are able to get to the school, you can't pass on information. And there could be lots of complex information. There's lots of reasons like it's a really weird decision. And and when I hear things like that, I always think they're going, what's gone wrong to cause that rule to come into place? And that demanding parents, it's again, to me, that's I feel this much communication is enough. The parents go, well, I feel this much communication is enough. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Or actually your amount of communication is enough. Perhaps you're missing one bit out.
Yeah, and it comes from a place from wanting to protect staff's workload and to protect staff mental health and those sorts of things. And I think that boundaries are important, but it's thinking about, are we going in too hard and fast with those boundaries by saying, okay, we're going to ban emails completely, rather than being clear about, you can email at any time, but the emails are only going to be read, beginning of the day, end of the day, or whatever the case is in your particular setting. And also that the tone of those emails needs to be calm and
constructive.
And, if you are using offensive language or, those sorts of things, that isn't acceptable. But by doing an outright ban, you're creating an inequitable situation where if somebody needs the opportunity to write something down, if you have English as an additional language, for example, silly side story, but I come from South Africa. It was very strong in our education system at the time and continues to be the case that you have to learn 2 South African languages, which for me was Afrikaans. My parents are British, so they're not Afrikaans speakers. And I did 12 years of schooling, doing Afrikaans every day in a lesson. I also did 2 years at university because if you're going to become a teacher, you need to have 2 South African languages. So that's 14 years of spending time in doing Afrikaans. I still can't have a functional conversation in Afrikaans. I've now been out of the country for 20 years. But even at the time, I couldn't have a functional conversation in Afrikaans. I could probably read a novel and I could write an essay for my exam. I couldn't do that now, but I could do it then. But I couldn't have a functional conversation.
It was just too fast.
So written communication is actually important.
Yeah.
And also spoken conversation, there's a lot of, we use slang and, there's a lot of other bits that get thrown in. It's less formal, which actually means it's more difficult to follow if it's not your primary mode of communication.
And also, especially when your school is throwing words that you've never heard of, like ordinary provision, and you're literally going, I don't know what that is. And you've got to try and remember it, to look it up, to understand. Whereas if it is an email, at least you've got a chance to go, I'm not sure what that is. I want to look it up. I'm not sure what that is. I can look it up. And then actually take time to digest. That's the thing, is sometimes when you're in that moment, a face-to-face conversation, if you've come in, because if you've arrived at school because you're late because of traffic, you've had a bad day at work, the cat just threw up, or something else, and you arrive at school and then the teacher grabs you and you're having that conversation, you're not in the best place to receive it, and it's not going to be constructive for anyone.
Absolutely.
So having that as a written, you get to read it at a good point and go, I'll come back to that. Right, I'll read it. It can change that response.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's I think written communication is important generally, even though I'm somebody who likes to talk. Having that written communication to refer back to is super important. But it's particularly important around any of your formal or statutory processes. What's happening in this annual review? Our guidance in the code of practice is that we send out all of the paperwork 2 weeks before the meeting, but that's not statutory. So actually, a school could not send that information out at all, send it out the night before, those sorts of things. It's not enough time for parents to process that information and to consider, how do I want to respond to this in the meeting? What do I need to bring with me to the meeting? So the timeliness of that and having it written down is important. But the same around things like transition arrangements. People will worry about that a long time before it's going to happen.
I just want to get that bit about when you send that document out is, again, completely understand how busy schools are, collating all that information. And it might be so much stuff on, you go, oh my gosh, the annual review's in 3 days' time, I must finish it off, and you get it out in time. In time was 2 weeks ago, where that parent can actually have chance to review, to maybe talk about things with their child, really go through it, understand it, think about it, and come up with solutions, prepare for the meeting. If you send that out the night before, yes, you have maybe fulfilled the requirement, but that conversation is not going to be productive. They're still processing it. They're going to be reacting to things that have said they haven't found out or thought about it. They're going to be, and everyone needs time to understand that information and come prepared for that meeting.
Yeah.
Not read the first line the night before, reacted, and ready for a fight. Whereas if they read that first line 2 weeks ago, read it again and read further down, went, oh, okay, I now get what they mean. There's a bit more context. Bad opening line. After that, it's great. It's all those sorts of things. That extra time means you can be constructive.
Absolutely. It's setting the meeting up for success.
Yes.
And that also allows you as a school setting to keep your boundaries. If you want to limit that meeting to an hour in length, you need to make sure that people have the opportunity to come to that meeting prepared. If you're going to drop a bomb in the meeting by sharing information for the first time, I have a client, a parent that I work with, who they got the annual review paperwork the night before, but there was no mention until the meeting that the school was saying we can no longer meet your child's needs and you need to seek alternative provision. If you drop a bomb like that in the meeting, the parent cannot give a constructive response because that's bad news.
To me, that is like emotional cognitive shutdown.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's going to happen. And anything you do after that is that it will explode.
Yeah. I'm explode first. In the sort of fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, I'm straight on the fight. They've dropped that bomb. Some F bombs are going to come flying out of my mouth. I'm just going to totally lose it at that stage and go full on the offensive. We have to give people, fair warning of things that are coming up. But the same is true the other way. Parents can't bring up big issues and expect them to be resolved. Someone will send a long email at 7 a.m. and expect it to be resolved by the start of the school day. It's not realistic.
Never send an email to the school as a parent. Never send an email which says, can I have a meeting today, please? That is a complete waste of time. Absolute waste of time. What's going to happen? You're going to turn up to a meeting. You're then going to say what your concern is. And that person will then go, I don't know about this. I will go find out and come back to you in a couple of days. Complete waste of everyone's time, but everyone gets anxious. You think you're going to go in and get that resolved. The head teacher or whoever you ask has no idea what's going to go on, finds out for the first time, has to go. It's so much better if you just ask, I would like to have a meeting today about the blah, blah with blah, blah. You might be going, I have no idea what this is about. I'll go find out. Then find out something you weren't told about. Might be a big issue, might not. But then you can get all the information. And then when that parent arrives in school that afternoon, you can then discuss that situation. To never, please, as a parent or anyone, never just say, I want a meeting.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
It's the most useless email in the world. And I get them sometimes at work. And I've had people who have used our software for years and have written a letter moaning about our software. And I've got to the first line and just went, they don't know about this really obvious feature. And I've looked and it's 4 pages. And I've driven all the way up to the other end of the country for free, walk into the school, and I showed them this one thing within the first 5 minutes. And they go, yeah, that is everything. And I'm like, you could have phoned.
Yeah.
You could have done anything.
Yeah.
But you made it a really big issue. You've made me drive all the way up to the other end of the country and for me to go click, click, click. And you just went, but you've put up with it for 4 years. So don't just, if you have questions, you ask them. Don't let them build up. Because again, when you build up, it becomes an angry question. Angry questions aren't good. You want a calm question.
Yeah.
And sometimes that does mean more communication,
Yes.
that you're asking
Yeah.
a few more questions. But if they're a nice, calm question and you give a nice, calm response, we move on.
Yeah. There's two bits I want to say in response to that. The first is coming back to the annual review example. I also advise the parents I work with to submit their own contribution 2 weeks before the annual review of their own thoughts on their child's progress, the
Yes.
provisions, etc., but also the questions that they want answered in the annual review. That might change when they, in the 2 weeks because they're getting more information, but then the school can be prepared. Same with parents' evening and things like that. Send something in advance of these are the questions I want to ask so that you don't spend 10 minutes talking about your child's lost water bottle and you do get to the thing you actually want to talk about.
But again, if you also have a really big question, parents' evening is probably not the best point anyway.
No.
That's a different thing.
But coming back to your email of, can we have a meeting today? I think that happens to parents a lot.
Yeah.
Can you come in to talk about your child? And whoever's sending that email of, can we have a meeting today? It's a hugely anxiety-provoking thing.
Yes.
It's like, it could be about almost anything. And most of us will immediately go into worst case scenario mode.
Yes.
So if you're asking a parent to come in to talk about their child, give a little bit of context, even if you're having to tell them, actually, there's been a behavior issue we need to chat through. Let us know that, because sometimes it's just you need to sign this form and it's fairly urgent. And another time it is a big, serious, actually, we're looking at a fixed term exclusion and this is a proper meeting.
A bit of a bit of highlight which direction we're going in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be, actually, there's a big thing and your child's been chosen. Was not expecting that.
Maybe that happens with your children more often than mine.
Once. It was like, they've been chosen for the cricket team. They don't like cricket. Then you're realising, it's everyone gets a turn cricket team. Okay, I get it now. It's the sport. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it is. In my head, I think for my wife being a teacher and my experiences, I would never send an email. So in my head it is, but it's more parents doing it to schools. But actually, there are probably a lot of schools doing it to parents. And I think the reason people do it with all of this is no one likes confrontation. So they think, it's best to not put it in an email because they'll react. I'll just say it to them. Well, no, because that is when they will react. I'd rather have someone react 30 miles away in their house when they on their front of their screen to their partner than right in front of me as I've just told them that news. That's much better for me. Maybe not for their partner, but actually to resolve the issue. They get that anger out in that supportive environment. They process it and they come and we can work out what we do.
Yeah.
That person who's having that email partner could be a parent or a teacher, just to be clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most important things when we're thinking about effective support for parents of SEND children is community building. So most of the parents I speak to who have children with additional needs will talk about how lonely and isolating that journey feels, which is actually kind of counterintuitive because data tells us that about 1 in 6 children in our primary schools have SEN. So you're definitely not the only one, and yet you feel isolated and alone. And so I think that it's really important that schools proactively consider how do we get some community building going for these parents so that they have an opportunity to meet with other people who are having similar experiences. Their children might be completely different, but they're faced with the same disability living allowance form, or they're faced with the same waiting list for CAMS, or whatever the case might be. Peer support is really, really important for parents. And if you're able to do that, it means that the SENCO or the class teacher no longer becomes the first port of call or the first line of defense, because somebody can share their frustrations with a peer or ask, questions they might think, this might be a daft question, but let me just check in the first instance.
Or they go, has anyone else had this happen? Yeah, that happens. But don't worry, it actually means this. Although it sounds like what you think, it doesn't. It means this, and it's all good. And it's that sort of, it can deflect. Now, I know some schools be going, I do not want them not getting together. They get scared. What are you scared of? Why are you scared? Why are you jumping to that? And it might just be an instant default. But you do not know. And there are others actually going, no, let's not get them together. It will be really bad. It's like, you are doing something wrong. But a lot of it is that fear of actually, if we put them all together, they might rise up against us. And I think what you'll find is there are probably, in schools, there are parents of children who are your allies. And there are parents who, no matter what you do, will never be enough.
Yes.
And that parent is your ally could actually just take the edge off that parent. Well, they're saying this like, yeah, your son probably doesn't need that. And it's that, I'm going to say the one-on-one TA, that seems to be the holy grail of the right support for my child. But in reality, if they only ever have a one-to-one TA, they'll only ever rely on that one-to-one TA. And we don't want them to rely on them. So we want to not have a one-to-one TA because they're more independent, because they'll never have that person all their life.
Yeah.
So it's those expectations where they hear from somewhere, actually being in that community where you're being told, actually, that's not the best thing. You might be thinking it is at the beginning, but over time you realize it's not. It's having those people in that community kind of giving them that advice.
Yeah.
People who are further down the line.
Yeah.
My son's just been diagnosed. Oh, here are great things to go and do. Blah, blah, blah. Things you can do. That's saving the school lots of time.
Yes. And identifying who those people are who can, terribly cheesy title, but it can be those ambassador parents of, we've had some experience, we've got a few rounds in the ring. We know what that looks like, but that they are people who are positive about the school, who have a good relationship with the school. Putting new parents in touch, or people who are new to your SEN register in touch with those parents, is actually really helpful. And that defensiveness that you talked about that schools can have about, gosh, we do not want these people getting together and rising up. If you're proactive about setting up the community and building those partnerships, and it comes from a positive place, and the culture is there's support for you and we're here to talk about it, you're actually less likely to get the rising up than if there's no community, people are not feeling communicated with or part of the picture, and they band together without you. You are much more likely to get that adversarial situation.
Now, I'll be thinking about this. In my head, I'm going, should someone from the school be in that group? My head says no. In reality, you should not be in that group, because you're going to hear the raw version. You're going to hear them reacting out of the annual review, blurting it all out and taking that personally. People need to vent, and that is a community of people who understand. What you probably want is those ambassadors to go, look, can you just give me every couple of weeks a heads up on what people are talking about? What is it they... Because in reality, if they're all saying we want this, and it's like they're probably right. It's probably something you should be doing. If it's only one parent, then you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
But if there's a real general consensus of you should be doing this, it's like, well, investigate it. Then when you start responding to what they're asking, now the whole group will be changed. They'll be going, actually, we asked for this, we moaned about this, and they're doing it. Okay. It completely changes that relationship between the school and the parent.
Absolutely. You want that feedback loop. You want that opportunity to hear about, okay, on the ground, what is and isn't working, what's landing and what's rubbing people up the wrong way. But equally, a community group will never work well if they feel that, the overseers are keeping an eye on what we're saying. Because as you said, it actually detracts from part of what's needed, which is the opportunity to share unfiltered how you're feeling about something and for other people to rally around. But the feedback loop's important. And I think having connection points where parents connect with the school, but it's not a formal meeting, things like coffee mornings or those sorts of things are actually really valuable. But I agree, you don't need to be in the WhatsApp group or in the email thread or whatever the case is. People can meet in the coffee shop. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, feedback loop is great.
Yeah. And one thing to think about, which I think someone else told me on this before, is if you're a teacher and you think about a parent at your school, think about the last 10 or 20 interactions with them. Yeah. How many of them were positive? Yeah. As a parent, think of your interaction with the school. How many of the last 10 to 20 interactions have been positive? And a lot of the time, the communication is only happening when something's happened, when there's an issue, and then you're pointing fingers at each other. But at that point, if the last 10 things you've ever had from the school are negative, when they get the next one, it's going to be negative. You've already got your fists out. You're picking a fight. You're ready. It's another one. Where else do you ever have that sort of situation? Where else you don't generally. So if you can be more proactive and you have more, and you try and go, okay, let's try and reduce it to maybe a ratio of 4-1 or 3-1 or 2-1, whatever it is going right. So every time we have a negative, we need to do 2 positive bits of communication afterwards, yeah? And then we have a negative, right? What you might find is that negative starts dropping because actually the parent, and I've been a football coach, nothing like teaching. I do know that. We work much harder as football coaches. No, we don't. We do not. But I did have Friday evening football coaching when they were all tired. And our club is a tiered club. We were the bottom team. We were the kids whose parents thought it was great for them to play football, even if the kids weren't interested. That was the team I had. And we'd be trying to work with these kids and they weren't interested. Then you'd hear some of them say, oh, yeah, apparently we're rubbish because it's the coach's fault. And if we get better coaches, we'll all be better. And you're literally going, no matter what I do, that's the message they're getting from the parents. So when you're having that negative communication, that communication will be fed back. That will be going around at home. They'll be feeding off each other. The child will be going, well, I don't have to listen to them. They're wrong. So you've got to try and break that cycle, and having that positive communication, positive thing for the child, the fact you're happy about this, they're celebrating this, really can transform and stop that negative circle going round at home.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing which is like football and teaching is
Yeah,
they were
yeah.
against me. The workload, I had no homework. It was great. No marking, no essays, no parents' evening. It was great. But it was just that. And I just sat there and went, there's nothing I can do to change that. There's nothing, because the parent have just decided their child is an amazing footballer, even though they're in the bottom team. Everything, it was like they decided, and there's nothing we could do. Whereas I think as a teacher, you can do things, you can change that communication, try and make it more positive, little bits of communication, celebrating things, being proactive, showing that actually I am taking your child's needs into consideration when we do this trip. I've done this, I've planned this. Actually, that parent starts to believe in you, and you can see the baby behavior changes in the child because that's just not being reinforced at home.
Yeah, but also that ratio of positive to negative is such an interesting thing. And there are lots of children, particularly young children with SEN, where there is some daily feedback to parents, whether it's that a teaching assistant gives verbal feedback at pickup time at the door, or lots of special schools still use the homeschool communication books that will go home in the taxi every afternoon and those sorts of things. What's interesting is if you look through those homeschool communication books, there are some members of staff who are very good at putting lots of positives in the book. And there are some who will only write when something has gone wrong. And vice versa. You'll have parents who only write when there's something they're not happy about or that's gone wrong for the child. But so I've landed up working with quite a few individual members of staff around we need to be making sure that we are peppering the book with positive things that happen, even if we're in a phase where, the child is telling us through their behavior that it's not going well at the moment. There are still things that you can highlight, even if it's just, Bob really enjoyed the sandpit today or whatever. It's catching those bits of positivity so that we're not always giving this is the bit that's not going well. Even if 80% of it's not going well, you can usually find some silver linings to include in your communications. I think it's important that parents know that we are invested in their children, that we like them and that we care about them, because we almost always do as professionals who work in schools. But that doesn't always come across if what we're reporting are the bits that are not going well.
And my wife's school, they obviously have, if I use the wrong terminology, because it's not correct terminology, sanctions, whatever it is they obviously have things where you behave a certain way, you get rewards. If you don't, you get a lunchtime or an after school. Cool. But my wife does weekly comms. What she doesn't do in the weekly comms is run through all the stuff that has happened that week, which has already been dealt with through a lunchtime or an after school detention. She'll write, yeah, it's been a challenging week, but, and then she'll list positive things. Yeah, we've already dealt with the negative. They've been done. They've been dealt with at the time. But actually, loved cooking, went here, did this, got engaged in this. Yeah. And then when he did do that, actually afterwards, he did reflect and his behavior changed. So the negative bits have been dealt with in that way. So that email is generally a positive end of week email. You go, yeah, it was a really bad start to the week. Completely understand why. But actually, he's really worked hard to change. If that email was, yeah, here's 4 after schools, 3 lunchtimes, blah, blah, blah. No one wants to read that. And also, you dealt with it already. What's the positive? Has anything changed? Has he had any impact? Has he reflected on anything and thought about? Has he made better choices? That's what the parents want to hear.
Yeah.
Not a rerun of the stuff that's already been dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They know.
Oh, yes, they knew. They got full guns blazing from their child when they got home about how unfair it was. Because my child was never wrong. It was never her fault. It was always unjust every time my daughter got the detention.
I do find that sort of line of thinking really funny, because I'm very much of the mindset of, if somebody tells me something's happened with my child, I'm automatically, thinking my child's done something worse than they actually have, rather than I'm like, oh no, what has she done this time?
My daughter, she got a detention in her first week starting at secondary school, and she was scared of telling me. And I'm like, you got detention? Yeah. What did you do? What's it for? Punching someone. I'm like, why did you punch someone? Well, there's a boy who was picking on my friend. I went, right. And she told him to stop and he didn't. I went, right. So I asked him to stop and he said no and carried on. So I punched him. Now, it took me about 30 minutes to get that story out. I slipped. I was reaching. We got there and she told me the story and I just went, high five. Now, if you're a teacher, you're probably hating that I high five my daughter for that. But from my point of view is she went through all the steps she should have done. And she stood up for her friend. And yes, she shouldn't have punched him, but I like the fact she stood up for a friend and she went, I got detention for it. And yeah, the boy got punched by a girl and that would have been worse for him. So he would have learned not to do that again. But yeah, I was just like, why? I'm always a why. Yeah, my daughter does things bonkers sometimes. There's a why, and I generally understand the why she did the bonkers thing.
Yeah.
So, and that's I think my wife's learned that with school. Is like, yeah, that child had a really bad day. Why? Short of ADHD medication. Things like that.
But those reflective conversations I find utterly fascinating. And I think that is where the most learning in your life ever happens, is in those reflective conversations where, your daughter's telling you about both what's happened, her motivations, like why she's taken that action, et cetera, et cetera. And you've had that conversation about, this is how we deal with these situations, et cetera, et cetera. You have those kind of discussions about your values. It's really important that we stick up for our friends, et cetera, et cetera. But you also have that kind of, I don't know if risk-reward balance is the best way to describe it, where, when you're in that split second, when you decide whether to punch or not, that you're having that little conversation with yourself about the consequences of doing this are going to be that. Is that a risk that is worth taking? And sometimes it's worth taking the detention. That's not the best teacher answer ever, but it's true. Sometimes you go, it's not necessarily the best outcome, but I understand the consequences of what I'm doing. And having those conversations about what are the consequences are great. But it would be very easy for you as a parent to jump into that and say, no, the school's banked her rights. My daughter did all of the things that she was supposed to do. The boy carried on. She's not having that detention. But there's value in the detention itself, in about your daughter sort of understanding that even if I'm not totally in the wrong, there are still consequences for the choices that I make, and that right and wrong there's a duality there. There isn't I'm totally right and I'm totally wrong. I can be both right and wrong at the same time.
I would say in that situation is the correct answer. We should go tell a teacher. I don't know where the teacher's was. I don't know if my daughter would have had to leave the situation to go to a teacher to come back to a worse situation. So in reality, not leaving her friend was overall the right decision. Now, if we fast forward that, and if she was year 7, so if we fast forward that 7, 8 years, out at night, someone's attacking them, does she leave her friend to go get help? No. So it's one of those in different situations, and I get there is school rules don't always line with logic, and we literally went, yeah, you got that detention, suck it up. You did the right thing, but sometimes the right thing comes with a consequence.
Yes, yeah. And definitely.
She did that. She gets detentions for rolling up her skirts. It's like, don't roll your skirts, but everyone else is. Well, if you want to roll your skirt, you got detention. That's your choice. Risk and reward.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I do think going back to the parents at these schools is just think about that, how much that communication with that parent is positive. Yeah. if you think about life, the people we don't like, we don't talk to. Yeah. If you don't have a friend who you just constantly are horrible to and they're horrible to you and you keep calling them up to be horrible to, you would avoid that whole situation. But when you're in this, and if you're a company, yeah, I would go, I'm not buying from them. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd drive to the next McDonald's or the next Burger King or the next whatever shop it would be. I'd go somewhere else. If I had an issue with Tesco's, I'd go to Sainsbury's. You can't do that in schools. You end up is that parent has to deal with that school. That school has to deal with that parent. You cannot change that. How that communication goes, everyone is in control of that.
Yes.
Everyone can be less aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that takes a real conscious effort, but ultimately, the parent and the school both want what is best for the child.
Yes.
So, as a parent, although you may want to punch them, does that help the situation?
Never.
And you've got to sit there and go, what is the right thing to do for my child? And sometimes it's fighting. Sometimes it's a polite fight. It's slapping them with a glove rather than punching them in the old style. It's how can you change your communication to achieve a better outcome?
Definitely. And I think sometimes it's okay to recognize that that's going to need a third party.
Yes.
So some of the work that I do with parents is supporting them in going to meetings that they are going to find difficult, so that there's somebody to represent their point of view, but who is able to do that in a calm and considered way because they're not directly involved with the child. And it's thinking about, coming back to our community building, etc. Is there somebody who can be alongside that parent? Are there times when we need to bring the SEND governor in to join our meeting so that, yes, the governor is by nature part of the school, but, somebody who's less directly involved in the situation? Or actually, let's bring in another professional, the speech therapist or whatever, to be part of this conversation so that it's helping us to stick to the direction in which we're trying to move rather than this emotional tug of war we've got stuck in.
Yes. And I was thinking about when you're getting extra people involved in a meeting, that can go really well. It can go really badly. Depends. If you go, oh, let's get the speech and language therapist involved, and then actually as you go in, you realise they've been in there for about 45 minutes. They've both got cold cups of tea. You'll both be going as a parent. They've been moaning about me for 45 minutes, haven't they? They've both got their stories aligned.
Yeah.
They're both on the same team. Oh, I've now got to pick a fight with both. There are things like that that can really intentionally or unintentionally by the school. Generally, it's unintentional, but it can really. So if a parent goes for an annual review and they walk into a room and everyone's on one side and they're on the other, that's everyone against me. A circle will be better. Yeah, everyone having equal status in the room. It's lots of little things like that might be tiny, but make a really big difference to, again, what is the best outcome. Yeah, it's not about we're all the professionals, so we're going to sit together and you're the parents. No, we're all in a circle with the child in the centre. We should all be thinking about the child.
Not literally. Let's not literally put the child in the centre of the annual review.
Spotlights. But also, Jenny said, is don't give everyone an adult chair and then give the last chair, which is a really small child chair, from the reception class to the parent. That's a power move. That
always happens in parents' evenings, though. So the teacher will have their chair that they use at the front of the classroom or from their desk or whatever, and you're sitting on the children's chairs.
It's a power move. And it's one of those, I don't think people realise it's a power move because they're not in that situation. But if the parent came in sitting on that lovely comfy chair and that teacher was sitting on that really uncomfortable chair looking slightly up at them, they would be going, oh. And I think it is completely unintentional, unnoticed by everyone, and the parent might not even consciously notice it, but it's like when they're being told off when they're at school again.
Yeah.
That the teachers are lined up there and I'm wrong.
Yes. And I think for people who are listening to this, they may not know, but I'm a pretty big woman. And so sitting on a reception...
She's not an Amazonian.
No, I'm not tall. But, I have that double thing of not only is it a power move, but is this chair actually gonna support me is also a worry. But I think it also happens in other things, like the cups of tea you were talking about. Often you'll walk into a meeting And people have got their travel mugs or whatever that they've filled up in the staff room, but there isn't anything for the parent. And it's this thinking about, is everybody comfortable? Does everybody have what? Do we have water available? Do we have tissues if we need them? Have we got some pens? Like those sorts of things. They're just making sure that needs are being met in that meeting.
And yes, everyone's very busy. They're very limited on time. But 3 minutes getting that room ready, 5 minutes getting that room ready, prepared, go getting a jug of water, make sure the gloves are there, could have a completely different outcome on that meeting. It sounds like witchcraft when you say things like that. It does. Those sorts of things make a real big difference. It's like telling your partner, saying those things in an argument that you mean, but you say it in the wrong way. Wait 2 days, say it in a calmer way, it'll be heard.
Yes.
It's exactly the same thing. When that parent comes in, the paperwork's been late, they're ready for the fight, you drop a bombshell, they haven't got a glass of water to just have that moment to collect themselves and just have a sip, that meeting will go very differently.
Yeah, and it's things like, particularly for something like a big meeting, like an annual review, that the person who goes to collect the parent from the waiting area is somebody that the parent has a good relationship with. That it's that kind of like, oh, yes, I know this person. I know I'm on safe ground here. They walk together, they have a chit chat, whatever. Those sorts of things are super, super helpful. And yes, like we know that school staff are busy. I've got quite a good quote from a parent here. When I was first doing a talk about this for a local authority group, I asked on my social media, were there things that parents wanted schools to know about the support that they need in the communication? And one of the parents said, we know you're busy. It's not that we don't care, but our children aren't receiving the educational support. And this is impacting our family, our relationships, our social life, our finances. And I know we spoke about this at the beginning, but I think sort of knowing the context of both groups is so important. The stresses that people are under, we have to keep that in mind.
And I think the counter argument to that would be schools, we have no money. We have less staff than we want. Our level of need, our number of students with SEN going up, their complexity is increasing. We're learning, we're trying to keep up,
Yeah.
but with less staff, less time, more pressures and everything, we can't.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate answer that schools want to say but can't. They can't say we can't keep up. Not really allowed to, it'd be wrong and someone will pull them up on it, but that's the basic answer. And more money would obviously help. I don't mean more money as in throw money at SEN. I mean like just more money generally for schools would be lovely. The curriculum and assessment review, which is due end of this year, the new office inspection framework, where it's actually going, there's much more of a requirement. Yeah, there's no legal obligation. There's an EHCP, but that's a whole, as everyone knows, there's a big fight around actually getting what you need, and it's nuanced.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas actually things like the office inspection framework is going to make SEN much more of a focus. The curriculum and assessment review will hopefully change things to make them more inclusive, and it might be small changes, but they can make things. We want all of that as soon as possible, and I completely get that schools are really busy. My wife is a teacher. I work in education. I really, really get it. But what I see a lot of schools doing is the way we've always done it, which isn't always an efficient way, and reactive rather than proactive, and dealing up. And if you think of, you've got your toddler, and you see a cup of water near the edge of the table, you see it and look away, then your toddler spills it. If you'd seen it and just moved it away from the edge of the table, the glass wouldn't have been broken, the water wouldn't have been spilled. You're not going to spend time cleaning it all up.
Yeah.
You could have just moved it and moved on.
Yeah.
That really is, we're talking about glasses, broken water. That's someone's emotions. That's their whole weekend gone. It's much more than just a glass of water, but in reality, just moving that glass could have had such an impact. Sending one nice positive email at the end of the week can have a really positive impact.
Yeah. And I think the more we can share information with parents to signpost them to what other supports are available out there, we know that in the same way schools' budgets have tightened and tightened and tightened, we've seen a reduction in services that support families. I've seen that in my own life. There's a 5-year age gap between my daughters. And the first was born in 2014, the second born in 2019. So, things will have moved on since then. But there was such an obvious gap between how much breastfeeding support was available with the first versus the second. The things that were available in the children's centre with the first that weren't there with the second. All of the, there were obvious changes in support systems. How the 2-year check was done was completely different. And less time was spent, it wasn't in person, all of those sorts of things. But there are still things that we can link parents to that most of them don't know anything about. Every local authority has a parent carer forum, which is run by parents and carers and will represent to the local authority around consultations and things like that, but also provide support for the other parents. Every area will have an ADHD support group, an ASD support group, those sorts of things. Share information so that parents can be connected to the supports that are out there. I spoke to a parent just last week. It's not necessarily the best example, but her child is in year 6. She's had an EHCP since she was in year 1. She now attends a specialist school. She didn't know disability living allowance existed because the information's not systematically being shared. There's some situations where when your child goes through the autism diagnostic process where you will actually be given disability living allowance information immediately. And there's some where people just assume you must know about that and you don't. It's not necessarily the most important example, as I said, but it's those sorts of things where people just don't know the information's out there.
And it's also one of the things that lots of people almost fall over it later on, but they forget to maybe pass it on.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's one of those ones. And I know that, like, if depending on your needs, you can learn to drive at 16. And it's things like lots of little things. And there's so many little things you can get, but someone has to point you to it.
Yes.
Because you're not worrying about that at the moment, even though it can make a big difference. But there's lots of little bits. You can get blue badges, which sounds like a little thing, but it can make a big difference. There's lots of things, but it sounds like it's an outside of the school thing. But actually, if you can make their whole life better by getting them support in other places, then you're not doing all the support yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The better supported the parent is outside of the school, the less they're going to come to you as the first line of defense.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah. So I think that signposting to other services is a really important part of supporting parents.
Definitely. And there's loads. There's obviously our podcast is mainly aimed at schools. There are lots of parents listening, but there's also lots of other podcasts like PDA Dad and lots of others which are actually much more on the parent's experience. And there are things that I think every parent goes through, and they will kind of help you on that journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the same with the parent care. It's those sorts of things. It's always nice to hear from someone who's further down the road. And I go to things like the autism show, and somebody got told that I think their child was a 4, and she was just telling someone my child's got autism. And the person replied with, well, their life's ruined then. They're never going to get a job. My son's got autism, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, so you probably had a bad day. And yeah. But at 4, you don't know what flavour of autism they've got. They might have butterscotch. And I said to her, it's so early to tell. And as she's sitting there going...
Have you given yourself a flavour name?
No, I haven't. Probably candy floss. But it's one of those things you just don't know what flavour you get. And at 4, you really have no idea. There are so many things, so many variables. And this poor mum literally was just going, what am I going to do? Because she had such a bad idea of autism just from a couple of people. And also that, I think, struggling with school, because also until you get a diagnosis, you're a bad parent and it's your child's fault.
Yeah. That parent blaming mindset, I think, is super, super problematic. I've probably got the quote here somewhere, but there was a parent who, when I said I was asking for feedback, and they said, it's usually not a parenting issue. Like, stop blaming the parents. Yes, the parent might be in a state because things are not going well, but that doesn't mean that the underlying problem is their parenting. There's lots of phrases like, mum is anxious, that, you have to think about, well, where is that coming from? It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing.
Mum is anxious that we're going to blame her again.
Yeah. It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. Like, are these problems created because mum is anxious? Really unlikely. It's much more likely that the situation is making somebody
Her
anxious.
life was supposed to go in that direction. It took her a hard right turn at some point,
absolutely.
And she's lost.
Yeah.
And trying to get help.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and the
of course
gap
she's
between
anxious.
her expectation and reality is massive.
Of course she's
Absolutely
anxious.
massive. And she's having to push for every little thing for her child. I'm using a mum as an example here, but, it's it is work that largely falls to mothers. But obviously there are dads who are in the same boat. But yeah, we assume that because we're maybe meeting somebody at the point that they are already upset or distressed, etc., that is the underlying cause. But that's almost never the case.
No.
It's not never the case, but it's almost never the case.
I think there's that real big difference between causation and correlation. And there's some amazing graphs people have done, like it's like volcanoes going off are linked to Neil Diamond record releases. There's a correlation. If you graph it all, they're linked. So it's like, is it causing it? Or is it just random? And I think people, when they see correlation, they immediately think cause.
Yeah.
Like absence causes bad results.
Yes.
No, they are both correlation. Something else is causing both of those.
Yeah. One of the phrases that's coming up a lot recently is, those parents are letting their child stay at home. So, well, there's actually only so much you can do if your child is really not up for going to school. There's very little you can do. And actually, you get to the point where the things you could do are abusive. You can't actually physically drag your 16-year-old kicking and screaming down to the school gates and kick them in.
And even if you did, what would they get from that day or the next day or the day after that? Not a lot, because whatever it is they didn't want to go to school is going to be in their mind.
Not only that, what damage does that do to the relationship? What damage does that do to the family? But yes, we hear phrases like this. Mum is anxious. They're letting their children stay at home. It's the parenting. I hear this a lot, even on a workshop I was delivering a couple of weeks ago. Those were the sorts of phrases that were coming from school staff. Not all school staff. There's great people out there. But I think it's really important that we all check ourselves. And the same about the comments that, parents are making about teachers. They're lazy, they're knocking off at 3:00. That SENCO's not doing any work, she's useless. Well, all of that is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Everybody is giving their best.
It's interesting. I came across an experience recently where a parent back in my day when I was at school and we had tuppence for, not quite, but we did have milk in the morning at in the infant school. It stopped partway through primary school. But my teacher was always in my class. My teacher was always Monday to Friday, every single lesson. They even did PE with us. Now they have a thing called PPA. Yes, that's common knowledge to every teacher. Everyone who works in education, PPA is very known. But unless you work in education, you do not know. So when your child has an incident at school and you ask the teacher what happened and the teacher says, well, I wasn't in the classroom at the time, what are you going to think? Are you going to think, they're probably on PPA? Or are you going to think something else because no one's explained? When she just teaches that flippant comment, and you're like, actually, it's a complete different understanding. My teacher was always with me. Something happened, my teacher would have known.
Yeah.
Always. Why was that teacher not in the room? Where were they? Were they just dossing? Were they just having a fag break? Were they just sitting in the staff room with their feet up? No, they were PPA. Or they were the English lead and doing this. And the head teacher was in there. But that small comment, without having that knowledge, can be misinterpreted so quickly.
Yeah. And it can also be misinterpreted as dismissive. I wasn't there, so it's not my problem. That's not the intention of what the teacher's saying, but I think it comes over that way a little bit, like a sort of, like they're shrugging it off. Oh, well, I wasn't there.
Yeah, I think it was like the child got injured. And it's like, they had the injury. They did the phone call. So what happened? Like, I don't know, I wasn't in the classroom. It's like, so you were not, my child was unsupervised? And it's just all those sorts of things. It's like, no, it was PPA. They were probably on PPA. They're like, oh. But I think one of the things I learned from when I became a governor is in my daughter's primary school is because all the teachers knew and it was just obvious to them, they assumed everyone else had that same understanding. When we talk about ordinary alienable vision, you find out about it at that point. So they haven't telling you they're doing it because they just do it anyway. It's things like, lots of things like that parents have no idea about. But I think school staff assume, because they're in that world where everyone else knows, that the person I'm talking to will know. And I think that's a really easy just slip, whatever, completely unintentional, but can have big consequences in that communication. I literally became a governor at my daughter's primary school because there were so many things they were not doing. And I could not find anything mentioned anywhere, website, anywhere. I'd ask, I get really bad information. I became a governor. Once I was on the inside, I found out they're doing all of it. And I'm going, why aren't you letting us parents know? We all feel, a lot of parents felt like they were letting us down because they weren't doing this stuff. And they're like, No, we're doing it all. Like, we were asking you to do it and you weren't even responding to say we were already doing it. It was just a really weird situation. And it was just like more communication, just some clear communication would have fixed and really changed how parents felt about that school.
Yeah. Well, I mean, communication is one of those things that's a bit of a dirty word in schools. Insofar as if ever you send a survey out to parents to ask what you can improve in your school, communication will always come back as the number one thing. And
that was the reason the head teacher of the school never did those parent surveys, because she was always scared of the results.
But the truth is, we'll never hit 100% perfect communication because, of course, everybody receives communication differently. Some people are paying attention to your newsletter, some people are not, etc. You could make that a 24/7 job and still not hit the kind of ultimate. But reviewing your communication and just thinking about, it's not necessarily about more communication. It's about how effective is the communication. Have we got those standard operating procedures? Are we making sure that we're proactive rather than reactive? Are we getting those positive messages across? Just really thinking about, let's just relook at our communication and get it as sharp as we can. And actually, ultimately, it will save you time. If you have those things pre-prepared, it will save you time.
And just before we go, because we have been talking for a while, you just really think about, what communication am I doing to all parents that is positive? Yeah, way up. Every time I talk to that parent, is it about something negative? Yes. Right, I need to get some positivity in there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that would just become a bigger downhill trajectory. It just...
Automatically, our SEND children get more negative feedback than other children do, and our SEND parents get more negative feedback than other parents do. And so we actually have to work to try and counterbalance that.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
I'll let you go. No, got to wrap it up. No.
Sorry, my bad.
No. Thank you for coming today. As always enjoyed it.
Oh, such a pleasure. And you were mentioning podcasts for parents. I have a podcast called
Yes, you do.
Raising Confident Kids with SEN. And we very much talk about issues for the parents. So we have some parents who are interviewed on that, but also things like getting ready for your annual review meeting, particularly your child's first annual review meeting, those sorts of things. So that's available for parents to listen to too.
And if you're not typing in Raising Confident Kids into Google or Spotify or wherever, there will be a link in the show notes to Sarah's podcast as well. And I'll get Sarah to send me a couple other stuff, including her contact details, so you can get hold of Sarah. And as always, they will be in our show notes, which you will find wherever you listen to the podcast or on our website. So thank you for listening to the show. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And you can find links to subscribe across different podcast platforms on our website. And please follow us on the socials. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Twitter for now, Instagram, TikTok, and even Blue Sky now. And please use social media to share the SENcast with others. And before we go, I'd just like to remind you to check out SENcast Session with over 100 great video CPD sessions. I think it's even 150 now. And if you haven't accessed a SENcast session, these are video CPD sessions, often with the same great guests as on the podcast. We run 9 live sessions and 2 free SEND briefings every year. The sessions are £10 each per school, which you can watch live on the day, or you can watch it later on. They are yours forever. And it's a really great way to get CPD around SEN to all staff at a time that works for them. So thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the SENcast. It's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Bye, everyone.